Hello, boys and girls of Credit Union Land, and welcome to episode 61 of the CUInsight Experience. This episode is brought to you by our friends at Co-op Financial Services. Co-op is your trusted payments processing partner whose mission it is to drive the credit union movement forward. My name is Randy Smith. I'm one of the co-founders of CUInsight.com, and it is my job on the show to have conversations with the best and the brightest of the credit union community. I get to pick their brains and see if we can't find a few nuggets that we can all learn from. My guest on today's show is Ryan Donovan. Ryan is the Chief Advocacy Officer at the Credit Union National Association and also a big fan of the podcast, so I was really excited to get him on the show. From past conversations I've had with Ryan, I knew he was going to have a ton to share from both inside and outside of credit unions. We talked about the priorities for credit unions from a 30,000-foot level in the age of disruption and digital transformation that we all live in today, and how that has changed the way CUNA fights the credit union battle in our nation's capital. In the leadership and life hacks portion of the show, Ryan had some amazing insight and lessons learned over his career, and I'm going to tell you, there were just multiple times that I felt myself thinking, no, that's good stuff. So I hope you enjoy that. Probably have a pen or pencil ready and to take down some notes. As always, we have some fun with the rapid fire questions to wrap up the show. This conversation with Ryan was just a blast for me. So without further ado, I give you my conversation with Ryan Donovan. Enjoy. Ryan, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me, Randy. I have been very excited to do this with you.
We've been trying to make this happen for a long time. I know you've been an early supporter of the podcast and listener, so I thank you personally for that. And I think we're going to have a ton of fun here. So
I look forward to it. Let's go.
Let's go. I'd like to jump right in with a broad question. You're right in the heart of everything. You're there in DC. You're fighting the good fight for credit unions. What are the biggest challenges coming to credit unions from an advocacy standpoint?
Let's start at sort of the 60, 70,000 foot level. I think that, one of the biggest challenges that we have is aligning policymakers' perception of credit unions with the pace of change that's happening in the credit union system and more broadly in the financial services sector. So the financial services sector looks a lot different than it did in 1934. Frankly, it looks a lot different than it did 10 years ago. And credit unions operate in a very dynamic environment. Their members' expectations are evolving. There's a significant level of disruption taking place, fintech and elsewhere. And credit unions are trying to change to meet those new expectations and to really either insulate themselves from the disruption or be a part of the disruption, right? So the risk that we've got to mitigate is that the perception that policymakers have of credit unions is static. If a policymaker just has the image of a credit union that they had in 1990 or 1980 or 1970, and that's what they think a credit union is, then we're going to have a hard time helping them understand what credit unions are doing today. And so I think, there are really a couple of drivers of this. First, policy making in general is slow to respond to disruption and slow to acknowledge change. So that's one thing that's sort of driving a static perception of credit unions. And then the second is they're getting a lot of messages from bankers and others that credit unions that are changing is a bad thing, or that a credit union that's growing is a bad thing. But, the question that I pose, and I raise this with policymakers that express concern, I bring it up in media interviews, is what in the world would the bankers say if credit unions weren't changing or they weren't growing? Then they would complain that we're no longer relevant, right?
Yep.
So we try to address this challenge by, continuing to work to modernize the federal credit union charter. We try to leverage the progress that the state leagues are making in modernizing their state charters. We're looking for ways to show what credit unions are doing for their members and for their community and how that investment that lawmakers make in credit unions is a good bang for the buck. The bottom line is, we look for ways to show that credit unions are fulfilling the mission that Congress gave them to promote thrift and provide access for provident purposes. And, that's how we try to overcome that challenge. And so, listen, somebody listening to this might say, well, listen, Ryan just was asked about the challenges that we're facing credit unions, and he kind of went in this weird direction. He didn't talk about tax. He didn't talk about data privacy or any of that. But I'm going to tell you, when we figure out how to align the perception of credit unions that policymakers have with the pace of change that's happening in the system, we're gonna see those headline issues become a lot less of a challenge.
There was something that just while you were talking about that kept it just was making me think, I guess, was when you talk about the slow to act with the pace of change, a lot of the disruptors that come in don't have the same regulations that credit unions do. And they get years of, I guess you could say, like building up before maybe that conversation even starts. So, well,
and that is a big challenge that we're engaged in, every day on the Hill, certainly with the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau and NCUA, to make sure that there are similar expectations for entities doing similar things.
Yeah, like a level playing field, right? So
yeah, exactly.
Exactly. This was a question that I was just excited to ask, and I wanted to give you, let me tee this one up for you. If for our listeners from around the credit union movement, is there something that you would like them all to do that would make your job easier when you're, fighting the fight for us?
Absolutely. To put it in the most simple terms, it's engage credit union members in a conversation about the public policy challenges facing credit unions. Credit union members are the ones that are most invested in the system's success. They have the most at stake. And so it makes sense that they should know that credit unions are cooperative financial institutions that are tax exempt, and that credit unions use that status to help deliver high quality financial services that are safe and affordable. I am confident that most credit unions know that the financial services that they're getting are safe and affordable. I'm not confident that they know that a tax status and the cooperative structure is something that helps it be delivered. So we're renowned for having a very robust grassroots army, but Randy, the dirty little secret is that we are just scratching the surface of our potential. Now, consider two groups. I always use these examples, the AARP and the National Rifle Association, two large, well-known grassroots advocacy organizations. There are 38 million members of the AARP, about 5 million members of the NRA. There are 115 million credit union members in the United States. How would we be regarded if we were able to tap into that in a meaningful way? Now, I'll tell you, I get pushback when I use these examples for a whole host of reasons, but folks say, well, NRA members, they care more about their guns than credit union members care about their credit union. Really?
Or care about their money. How about that?
Yeah, exactly. Credit union members is putting their life savings in the hands of the credit union. They're coming to the credit union to help to afford life. They're pretty invested in what's going on. And I think that there's a way for us to have a conversation with credit union members that helps them understand what's at stake with the success of the credit union system, what's at stake in the public policy fight that we're subject to.
You say that, and one of the things that it makes me think of always when we talk about cooperatives is like how good of a job REI has done, right? Many people, me included, would rather go to REI to buy the Patagonia sweatshirt or whatever than order it off Amazon or order it directly, and it's just like you're part of something, so it's
the same principles are at play here. And I think, in terms, you asked, what would make my job easier? Well, wow, if we just had 30 or 40 million grassroots advocates, that would make the job a whole lot easier.
I could only imagine. We started at 30,000 feet. I'd like to stay up there, but take it out of the advocacy side and look more at. We've also mentioned disruption and the pace of change. Is there something in credit unions that you think needs to fundamentally change to keep up with that pace of change, to keep fighting the fight, right?
Well, I don't have direct visibility into this, but I am worried about succession planning at the board and at the executive level at credit unions in general. There are a number of factors that are in play when you consider the consolidation of the credit union system into fewer, larger credit unions. And frankly, the same phenomenon is happening in the small bank sector. And again, maybe some same factors and some different factors, but I wonder how many credit unions we might lose simply because they're unable to find a successor at the CEO level. And, the great thing about the credit union system is, when the credit unions merge, the credit union members are still served by another credit union. But I think the loss of any credit union means the loss of an opportunity. Our cooperative system has thrived for a really long time on taking the good idea that one has and applying it to many. Ed Filene would talk about this in terms of taking the best of what there is and making it even better. Well, with fewer credit unions, we may end up serving more people and through bigger credit unions, which is great, but we may lose some opportunity to take some good ideas and make them even better.
I agree with you. And succession planning by merger. Right now, Jill's probably going, "Oh no!" So that's one of her pet peeves. So, yeah. Last question in this section: if we were to sit down a year from now, what are you and the advocacy team at CUNA just most proud that you've accomplished? Kind of break out that crystal ball for me.
Sure. Yeah. No, we're putting a lot of effort right now in sort of pivoting our advocacy message from one that talks about common sense regulation and the need for common sense regulation to one that's more focused on credit unions advancing communities and empowering financial well-being.
That to me sounds more offensive than defensive, quite honestly. So
yeah, we're trying to get on the offense because frankly, the political environment demands that we do it. It demands that our strategy be nimble and adaptive. And it also provides us what we think is a lot of opportunities to leverage what credit unions are doing for their members and for their communities. So a year from now, there are really two areas where I think I'd like to see us having made progress. The first is I hope that we have made strides towards what I call Project Zip Code for community impact, where what I'd like to be able to do is have the ability for any credit union advocate to walk into any congressional office and as fluently as we tell them how many credit union members they have, I'd like for us to be able to talk about the overall community impact that we're making with data from multiple sources, with information from credit unions, with the stories that we're working to create. To really crack this nut, though, is going to take a lot of work. It's going to take a lot of resources. But the good news is that there's a lot of good work already being done in this area. The Northwest Credit Union Association, the Iowa League, Jeff Olson and the folks at the Dakotas.
Yeah, he was just on the podcast talking about CU Social Good. Yep. That's
right. There are some really great programs there. There are a number of credit unions that are doing a great job. Wright Pat in Ohio, University in Texas, just to name two. There's, a lot of credit unions are doing this. But the key question here is how do we bring together an effort that's national, that's comprehensive, it's accurate, and importantly, that's maintainable so that it's not a one-off deal. It's not something we do and we forget about. It's something that we keep going. The second thing that I'm hopeful for in the next year is that we've turned the corner from simply talking about credit union community impact to being able to evaluate public policy proposals through a lens where we're able to talk about the impact the proposal would have on credit unions' ability to empower financial well-being, improve financial health, advance financial inclusion. We have done a really good job over the last several years of talking about the cost of regulatory burden to credit unions. What we need to do a better job of is talking about the cost of regulatory burden and public policy changes on credit union members and their ability to access safe and affordable financial services.
Oh, that makes sense to me. I'd like to move on to the second part of the show, the leadership and the life hacks. As we kind of move into this portion, I always like to ask the question, what inspired you to take the gig at CUNA? Back in, I think you've been there since 2007 now, if my interwebs research serves me right.
The Google engine is running well for you, Randy.
Okay.
Honestly, I didn't think I had a choice.
That's awesome.
I'll tell you the story here. I was working at the time for the California and Nevada Credit Union League, and I was on vacation in Colorado. And the person who at the time was the vice president of legislative affairs, the position that I started at CUNA, he calls me and he tells me, Ryan, I just wanted you to know that today I resigned. And this was pretty abrupt. I was not expecting this. And then the next words out of his mouth were, and I recommended that they hire you. And I thought to myself, gee, thanks. That's just the type of recommendation that you want for a job. And so, we had a nice conversation and I went back to my vacation. And the next day I got a call from the senior vice president and he was talking to me. He told me about the resignation and he was talking to me about the job. And at this time I was really happy working for the California Nevada Leagues. I wasn't looking. I didn't have a resume, nothing. When I kept thinking about this position, I frankly, I wasn't sure that I would be successful in the role. And so as we kept talking about this, I kept pushing back. And finally, I thought I found my out where I said to the guy, I said, I really feel like I need to talk to Bob Arnold, who was my boss, and Bill Cheney, who was the CEO at the leagues at the time. And he said to me, Dan's already talked to Bill. The job's yours if you want it. And my response was, can I at least finish my vacation?
Yeah. When do you need me?
The other thing that comes to mind, just sort of thinking about the inspiration, is I had a similar experience when I joined the leagues. I'd been working for Brad Sherman for 5 years. The lobbyist at the California League was in Washington, and she told me that they were thinking about opening an office in Washington. And she said, do you know anybody who'd be good? I was like, yeah, this guy.
Right here.
Hey. Right here. Yeah. And I think the moral of both of those stories, Randy, is, be at the right place at the right time. And also in both situations, I had people that were looking out for me because they knew of my capabilities and my work ethic. And I think when you feel that a job is bigger than you and you've got other folks that have confidence in you and maybe even more confidence than you have in yourself, you've got to put all your effort into doing the job as best you can so that you don't let them down. And hopefully you prove yourself wrong.
Absolutely. Well, it seems like you have. So congratulations, my friend. So now that you've been in DC for a while, how has the inspiration changed with time on the job, or has it?
Yeah, no, I mean, it seriously, it has. I came to Washington about 23 years ago to work in government. I came out to Washington to work for my hometown Congressman, Dick Gephardt. I had no thoughts about being a lobbyist, really wasn't thinking about credit unions. I had some interesting early life connections to credit unions, but I didn't enter this space to work for credit unions. And, you talk to your guests often about sort of stumbling into credit unions, and that was certainly the case for me. But something happened along the way. And, I've tried to pinpoint when I sort of made this transition, and it's probably during the consideration of Dodd-Frank and maybe in the aftermath of that. But there was a point in time when I realized I didn't want to go back to the Hill. I probably will never work on Capitol Hill again. And then I got to a point very shortly thereafter where I kind of said to myself, I really don't want to lobby for any other group than credit unions. And so at that point, I really put my focus on how can I lead my team better? How can I learn as much about credit unions to be a better advocate for them? How can I learn as much as I can about how the association functions? And that was a real change in mindset. And I'll give you an example. You'll be able to relate to this, I think, in how this impacted me. You travel a lot. I travel a lot. And I'm sure that you cross borders occasionally and get asked by a customs official what you do and why you're there, right?
Yep.
And I can remember, in the late part of the last decade, or the 2009, 2010 time period, I would say, well, I'm a lobbyist, and they would ask, what does that mean? And I would say, well, I try to influence the government. And they say, what do you mean you try to influence the government? You can try and influence our government? These days, I stick to trade association executives. I was going to say, right? That's how I view what I do. And it's a big change from what I set out to do 23 years ago.
I tend to say I work in credit unions. I don't even say news of credit unions, like the news sources, because I'm a little bit afraid they're going to be like, are you here reporting? No, I'm not. So a question for you on your leadership style. You mentioned your team and, trying to be a better leader for them. How would you describe your leadership style? And I'm going to add on the question that you I'm sure is coming. Is there something they've heard you say so many times they can finish your sentence?
Oh, yeah. Well, I'm a big believer in hire good people and get out of the way. And it's so much easier said than done.
And that is true.
Yeah. I mean, and it's even harder, I think, when you kind of grow up within an organization as I have. A lot of people tend to view you the same way that they did when they first met you. So even though my role has changed, several times over the years, occasionally I'm introduced as the guy, as the Hill guy for CUNA, or sometimes I'll be introduced as the California lobbyist, and it's been a long time removed from that. But the role that I've got is a lot bigger than that. So what I've got to resist is the tendency to reinforce those perspectives by really sort of getting into the day-to-day of either the business unit or especially the government affairs operations.
Yeah,
so
the job you used to hold, right? So
exactly.
Yeah.
The team that I lead, we engage Congress, regulators, the courts. We support league's efforts at their state governments. We run a $7 million PAC. We're maintaining and enhancing our grassroots machine. We're conducting cutting-edge policy analysis for credit unions. And I think the credit union system is really fortunate. At CUNA, we got 35, 40 people that are dedicated to this. They're joined by 100 people at the state league government affairs professionals, league presidents, all working on these things, trying to push in the same direction. And I know that if I tried to do any of the jobs by myself, it'd be a failure. I told one of the league GAPS people recently, hey, had some questions and ideas about the PAC, and I said, go talk to the PAC people. Because if I try to run the PAC on a day-to-day basis, I'm going to lose the strategic perspective that I need to be successful in my position. And frankly, as far as the PAC is concerned, if I tried to run the PAC, I'd probably end up in jail. Not because I'd be doing anything nefarious, but because it's very complicated. You need experts there. And so the point is, you've got to, why would you have a good team if you don't let them do what they were hired to do? Support them when they need it. Guide their work so that it aligns with the strategic plan, in our case, the advocacy agenda, and then get out of the way and watch great things happen.
So what has the team heard you say more than any other that they can finish your sentence?
Well, I think I get a lot of eye rolls when I start my every presentation with sort of this recitation of our advocacy goal from our strategic plan. But, advocacy is a process, not an event. It's a marathon, not a sprint. And then one thing that I really like to say as much as I can in the office is really, it's a Lewis Carroll quote, and it's, if you don't know where you're going, any road will lead you there.
Absolutely.
And, keep everything connected to our strategic plan and to our agenda. We can't go wrong if we do.
So you were just talking about that. Your position has obviously changed. You've kind of moved up the ranks inside CUNA since you've been there. As a leader, we all have to make difficult decisions that sometimes people don't like in the short term. I'm guessing this has come up in your career more than once. That unpopular decision for the greater good. How have you cultivated in yourself the ability to make the tough call?
Well, I think it's gotten a little bit easier over the years as we've gotten tighter alignment to a broader plan, right? So if you know why you're making the decision, then you can better communicate that why to folks. And, even if it's an unpopular decision, if it's based on a widely agreed to plan, I think it helps make it easier for people to understand. It also helps, I think, to understand why the decision might be unpopular. Is it causing confusion? Because then maybe the vision, you haven't done enough to make the vision clear for folks. Is it causing anxiety? Then maybe people are concerned, hey, maybe I don't have the skills to manage this decision, this idea, this direction that Ryan wants us to go in. Is there resistance? Well, maybe we haven't fully established a good balance of incentives, or perhaps there's frustration and because folks just feel like there's no way we can do this, right? We don't have the resources. So if you can key in on what's making the decision unpopular, then there's an opportunity, I think, to address those short-term issues. But the bottom line is, know why you're making the decision, and then do your best to effectively communicate that rationale.
Man, I think you made some great points in there. Sometimes it is, did we just not articulate the message good enough, right? So
bring people along.
Yeah, absolutely. When you think back to earlier in your career, is there a mistake that you made? And then, working with CUNA, I mean, you're working with a lot of different leaders. So, or is there a mistake that you see young leaders make often?
Yeah. So, I was a chief of staff on Capitol Hill at 29. And then when I came over to CUNA, I was 32 or 33. I was the youngest vice president at CUNA, I believe. So I had a lot of opportunities to make mistakes as a youngster. and Randy, I am confident that I am still making mistakes today. I think great leaders make mistakes.
Yeah, I agree.
You got to learn. So, at any age, and for folks that are hiring managers, and this is something that I've learned, a great mistake that you could make is letting problems fester too long. When something isn't working out, don't hope it's going to get better. Don't ignore it. Just do the right thing for the organization. It might mean a difficult conversation, up front, but you're going to get back on track, and it's going to be better in the long run. And then for young leaders, and this is something that I had to really work on, during that time when I was younger, which is talking yourself out of taking a risk because you don't think you have enough experience or because you think you're too young. I say to folks all the time, never let the number of times you've gone around the sun be a limit on your potential.
I like that. That's for sure. I think that's such great advice, though, because all too often we don't, if we don't take that chance, we're not going to grow. So it's funny to hear you talk about that, because so many people, and I think in different ways, have talked about it over the past season of the podcast, right? Whether it was Sam Paxton talking about just going and doing it, or I remember, I'm thinking of Tracy now from Montana talking about something similar too. So that's great advice to hear. Has there been a piece of advice or a life lesson that you received that you find yourself going back to, over and over the course of your career?
Yeah, I'm going to say this phrase and just preface it with what I'm about to say often has sort of a negative connotation to it, but I mean it in a really positive way. And it's suffer fools gladly. And for me, what that means is simply everyone is coming at life with a different set of experiences, expertise, and perspectives. And the best thing that we can do is accept that and not let it frustrate us.
The empathy word comes to mind there. So,
yeah.
One of the things that I noticed in the first season was how many people, like mentors, were very important in their life. Did you have a mentor, someone who helped shape you to be the leader you are today?
Oh, yeah. I think there have been a lot of folks that have influenced me over the years. When I hear you say the word mentor, when I've heard it discussed on this show previously, every time I sort of put myself in the position, well, how would I answer that question? The person that comes to mind for me is Bill Hampel, who was our longtime chief economist. Just getting back to our previous question, Bill definitely suffered a fool gladly in helping me through my first 10 years in credit unions.
That's fantastic.
He taught me a lot about life and certainly about the job. I'll share one personal reflection about Bill as a mentor. I am very fortunate that I have a fantastic relationship with my dad. But in getting to know Bill better and watching how he interacted with his children, I actually saw things that not only made me a better father, but I hope made me a better son. Just in the way that, I got to spend some time with Bill and his son Alan over the years, and just how they interacted, it really gave me the freedom to dive even deeper into the relationship that I have with my dad.
That's pretty amazing. So, not only your career, but father, son. Wow.
Yeah. But, when he left, there was a hole there professionally. And today I'd count, certainly Jim Nussel and Jill Tomlin, Todd Stasinski, Greg Miklik, and Brad Miller. These are the folks that I work with, I think, most closely on a day-to-day basis. And each in their own way really helped me do my job better, but I think they also are helping me to become a better leader. So I'm real grateful that I've had that type of influence as well.
That's a great group to be surrounded by. Many friends there. So it's, I almost asked you something you were talking about earlier when you were, I guess you could say, offered the job at CUNA or told that you were taking it. It sounds like Bill Cheney almost had your the box packed and a plane ticket for you when you got back from vacation. But was there ever a point in your career where you felt like lost or had that self-doubt? And what did you do to push your way through it?
Yeah. So I mentioned earlier, I came to Washington. I had this tremendous opportunity to work for Dick Gephardt, my hometown congressman. It wasn't a glamorous job. First I answered phones, and then they let me open the mail, and then they let me start responding to the mail. And the last job that I had with him was I was his assistant scheduler in his leadership office. And what that really meant was I was his body man when he was in the office. If he needed anything, I went and got it. I just made sure that the meetings went along. It was fun. I got to see a lot of things. I was also going to graduate school at night at Johns Hopkins University. And when I finished graduate school, I really felt this urge to find a job that, for lack of a better way of describing it, made me think.
Okay.
I knew I wasn't going to be working for the congressman forever. And the way that type of office, that leadership office, is structured is that, it's hard to go from that sort of administrative level to a policy perspective or a policy position. It kind of, I was thinking about this earlier. It's kind of like going from playing Little League baseball to maybe AAA baseball, So I had to do something in between, right?
Yeah.
And, I wasn't quite sure what I wanted to do. I talked to friends, I exercised my network, but it took a really long time for me to find the right position. And it was actually pretty discouraging because the Hill's very competitive. There aren't very many job open. I mean, you're talking about, there's 535 offices. You're either a Democrat or a Republican, so that eliminates about half of those offices, right? So, and there's a lot of smart people looking to get those jobs. So I ended up working for Congressman Sherman from California, and that's really when I met credit unions. But that period of time when I was sort of in my mind transitioning out of the Gephardt world and trying to figure out what the next step was really, sort of a lost time. And I relied a lot on my network and certainly on my friends during that time.
So you're not the Hill guy anymore. So what does a typical workday look like for you? We'll clear that up for everybody. And I like the opposite side of this question too. What does a perfect workday look like for you?
Randy, there is no typical work.
There's no typical.
but Mondays are probably the most regular day that we've got at CUNA. We begin our day with our press call, and then I lead a business unit meeting, have a meeting with our government affairs folks. If everything goes well, those meetings are done by 11 o'clock, and we're headed off to a good start for the week. In terms of a perfect day is one when all the momentum is headed in a positive direction, where our teams are knocking it out of the park, the leagues are knocking it out of the park, and we can sort of see the progress we're making on the Hill, at the CFPB, at NCUA. It's just all coming together.
So this is a question. You're the first person. I had to do something special for you since you've been such a supporter of the show, but it's the first time I've asked this question, and it's whether it's inside, outside of credit unions. Was there that a moment of accomplishment that you had where you look back on it and it just makes you smile, like today, even when you start to think about it, where you're like, you know what, I killed that, and that was awesome. I just,
Yeah. So Randy, this was the hardest question for me to think about as I was preparing for this, frankly. And maybe it's because it's the first time you've asked it.
You've never heard it asked before. So,
so the example that I want to share is it kind of gets in the weeds, and it's also still a work in progress. So bear with me just a minute. But, when I look back at my time at CUNA, I think the thing that I'm most proud of is the work that I've been a part of to make the credit union system's advocacy more sophisticated and frankly more effective. And so let me explain what I mean by that. When I came to CUNA 12, 13 years ago, the credit union system was very rightly recognized as a grassroots powerhouse. We spent a lot of time protecting the tax status, and we were working at the time on getting co-sponsors for the CURIA legislation. We were 8 or 9 years removed from the Credit Union Membership Access Act, and there was this sense within the system that we needed a big win. And as a lobbyist coming into that, the way that I sort of internalized that was the goal was a Rose Garden ceremony. But what I saw and what concerned me at the time, and I wasn't really in a position to do much about it, was I didn't know exactly what our strategy was. I didn't think we had the right goal. I didn't know how it was connected to a broader plan. And I kind of felt like we went through the days and the weeks and the months going through a lot of fire drills. There was always an emergency of some sort. So, over the years, as I kept working, we did have some success. We had, a number of things coming out of Dodd-Frank that we were able to achieve, and we made some progress, but there was still something missing. We were very siloed. And, on a complex issue, just for example, like data security, prior to 2015, we had 4 different people working on data security, reporting up to 4 different executive vice presidents. And, I tell this story in my presentations. They didn't talk to each other, and their efforts weren't coordinated. And it's not the reason why we haven't been successful in getting a national data security law enacted. There's a lot of reasons for that, but it certainly didn't help that these efforts weren't coordinated. So what I'm proud of is that over the last 5 years, we've been able to set a new course. Our advocacy goal is to revolutionize the operating environment for credit unions through the removal of barriers and the expansion of credit union powers. That comes directly from the strategic plan. So everything that we do is coming from the leadership that credit unions have elected to set the course. The second thing is, we do this wild and crazy thing for a trade association is we're listening more to our members when we put together our advocacy agenda, and we're engaging our partners at the leagues to develop and implement that agenda. In fact, we've strengthened the connection with our league partners to a point where it's so strong. I call the group that works on advocacy the CUNA League advocacy team, because at the end of the day, if we're going to be successful, particularly at the federal level, we've got to work together as one team. That's what credit unions expect, and that's the only way we're going to win. We've recommitted ourselves to our grassroots advocacy. I was talking earlier about the need to get more credit union members involved, and certainly we've taken some steps over the last several years of that. And then we've realigned ourselves internally to be successful. So when I became Chief Advocacy Officer, my goal was to tear down the silos. All of the advocacy functions at CUNA are now under one umbrella. We don't look at issues, we don't call them regulatory issues or legislative issues or state government affairs issues or legal issues. Those are venues where the issues come up. The issues we work on are credit union issues, and we take a 360-degree approach to that, which means we're looking at them at all angles. And I'll just give you one example of where this has been successful. And this is what I am most proud of. I mentioned the CURIA legislation. Part of the CURIA legislation was to raise that member business lending cap from 12.25% to 27.5%. We banged our head on the walls of Congress for almost 20 years trying to get them to raise that cap. But it wasn't until we took a 360-degree approach that we were able to achieve success. We got NCUA to exempt participations from the cap. We got Congress to exempt 1 to 4 family non-owner occupied residential loans from the cap. And those two steps taken together have produced more cap space for credit unions than we were seeking in that legislation to go from 12.25% to 27.5%. Now, there is a lot more work for us to do, but man, I'm real proud that we're finally in a position where we can have that type of success, and hopefully we're going to be able to replicate it for a number of years to come.
Fantastic, man. That's good stuff. Before we move on to the last part of the show, the question, if you have a free day, there's nothing on the calendar, what passions does Ryan have outside of credit unions, and what do you do to recharge?
Yeah, I love to run. I love my girls, and I'm a lifelong diehard fan of the St. Louis Cardinals. So if I have a day where I can run 5 or 6 miles and watch the Cardinals beat the Cubs or the Nats with my daughters, then that sounds pretty good to me.
I'm sure there's a bunch of Cubs fans out there and Nats fans who are like, "Oh, come on!" No, but they understand.
Yeah, no, but seriously, over the last 10 years, Randy, personal fitness has really become important to me. I don't go crazy about it, but I realize that I've got a responsibility to those that love me and those that count on me professionally to make sure that I'm here next week, next month, next year. And that's a big part of my life outside of work.
That's good stuff. I need to get better at that. So part 3 of the show, the rapid fire questions. As you know, the questions are rapid, but your answers don't have to be. So what was Ryan like in high school? And I added this back. Do you remember the first time you got into memorable trouble?
Yeah. Well, my first time for memorable trouble is going to confirm what I was like in high school, which I think I was a big nerd in high school, Randy. And I'm going to tell you, I have looked forward to this memorable trouble question. I will not say that I have an answer as good as Diana's.
No, nobody does, right?
but I don't think it's hyperbole to say that my first brush with memorable trouble has had a lasting impact on humankind.
Okay, please do tell us more.
Okay, I was 15 years old. It was 1990. I'm a sophomore in high school. My parents subscribed to this internet service called Prodigy. Do you remember Prodigy?
It sounds like we are about the same age, so I do remember it. Yep.
$13.95 a month. You get dial-up internet. Now, I was really into Prodigy. Okay, and around this time, Prodigy tried to introduce a new fee on their internet service. And what they were going to do was they were going to charge everybody 25 cents for each electronic mail that their subscribers sent. So now, Randy, imagine your internet service provider today charging you a quarter or adjusted for inflation over the last 30 years for every email you sent. That'd be a lot of money, right?
Absolutely.
So I helped organize what I believe to be one of the first online protests ever. There were 9 of us that led the protest. We were aged 15 to 70. We organized tens of thousands of users to protest this change on the message boards on Prodigy. In essence, we were using their system against them.
Yeah.
We emailed their advertisers. We generated print and television press. The CBS affiliate in St. Louis came to my high school to interview me for the story.
Okay.
And as I was thinking about this story, and maybe I think I even called into like a radio talk show to raise this issue with Ralph Nader. I mean, this was like a big deal for me at 15.
Sounds like you got a lot of traction too.
Well, we did. Eventually, though, Prodigy identified the organizers. They booted us off the site, and that's when I got into hot water because my parents didn't know I was organizing this underground protest, and they had just lost the internet service that helped my dad, who was an airline pilot, keep in touch with us when he was on the road.
Oh, geez.
The good news is that the protests work. You're not paying a quarter for each email. Prodigy pulled back your fee, and the world is good.
We all owe you. Money, it sounds like. Geez, you saved us a ton. So.
I don't know. I mean, I get a lot of email I don't want these days.
Absolutely, right? So most of us stumbled into the career in credit unions. We talked about your path there, but what did you want? Did you want to play for the Cardinals? What did you want to be when you grew up?
Well, I mentioned my dad was an airline pilot. He retired 5 years ago after flying 40 years for American and TWA and Ozark Airlines. My grandfathers were both pilots. Okay. And that's an itch that I haven't scratched. I wouldn't do it professionally now, of course, but one day I do hope to pilot my own aircraft.
Oh, there you go. Do you have any daily routines? You mentioned that your health has become more important to you. Something that, if you don't do every day, your day just feels off?
I think the folks in my office would be disappointed if I didn't tell the whole world that I have to eat lunch at noon every day.
Every day.
Thing, and everyone is a lot happier when I do it.
That's pretty funny. So everybody knows. Block the calendar, right? The random question: what's the best album of all time? That one you can listen to without skipping a song.
Okay, this is easy for me, and it hasn't been on the show yet because he's kind of an obscure artist. But there's a guy named Griffin House. All of his albums are great, but I can put his album Flying Upside Down on repeat and listen for hours. So he's Tom Petty-esque. Okay. So strong songwriting. There's just so much passion and emotion in his lyrics. So I had the opportunity to meet him. I've seen him in concert twice, and I met him 4 or 5 years ago. And, essentially what I told him in the course of our conversation, as I totally geeked out on meeting him, was if I made music, if I was able to make music, this would be the type of music that I would want to make.
That's pretty cool. Well, now I'm going to be looking that up and listening to it this afternoon while I'm working because I not
show
heard
notes,
of him before.
Randy.
It'll be in the show notes. Everything will. So we will link to it. As you know, Jill and I are readers, and we were just talking that we probably need a new bookshelf. But so we keep buying more. Is there a book that either you've gifted or recommended over the years?
Yeah, so I encourage folks leading complex organizations to read General Stanley McChrystal's Team of Teams.
Okay.
This book was instrumental to us at CUNA as we tried to break down some pretty big silos and work better cross-functionally. And really the point is, that he tries to make here and that he employed during his time in Iraq was, you want to give everyone on the teams a broader vision of the battlefield so that they better understand how they're contributing and then they can better anticipate what might be necessary. So Team of Teams.
I've heard of that book, but I've not read it. So you're adding to the stack. I know we don't have it in the house. As you've gotten older, what's become more important to you? And my favorite part of this question, what's become less important? Yeah.
So more important, certainly personal fitness and time with my girls, not necessarily in that order. Less important, partisan politics and the small stuff. In my job, I've got to work both sides of the aisle. So, that's a function of the job. But I've really been sort of discouraged by the impact that partisan politics has had on how individuals outside the political realm interact with each other. And for me, how I view someone has never been impacted by their political views or the party that they're in. And I don't mean to sound harsh, but I just don't care, right? If somebody is a socialist liberal or a Tea Party conservative, that's their view. They're as entitled to their view as I am to mine, and it's not going to impact how I view them. I want to look at the strength of their character when determining how I view them. So that's bothering me because I see and hear so much just in daily life that concerns me about how much importance we're putting into that. Let's all go to the polls and decide it at the polls. And in the meantime, let's just be nice to each other. And then the small stuff. I'm just amazed, Randy. It's just the little things that, kind of get people's nose bent out of joint. I think when we focus on that, we really lose sight of the bigger picture. And it makes it a lot harder for us to treat each other, frankly, the way I think we should.
That's a good reminder. I didn't send the question, but I'm sure you know it's coming. So when you hear the word success, who's the first person that comes to mind?
So this is a hard question because it isn't sent in advance, but I know it's coming, and it's hard to have that first reaction. But I have thought a lot about how I would answer this, and the name that keeps coming back to mind every week when I hear this is Mitt Romney. And
tell me more.
Yeah, I mean, so again, let's take the politics out of it. I'm a Democrat. I have tremendous respect for Senator Romney. And when I think about success, his name comes up because, first of all, he was a successful businessman. He saved the 2002 Winter Olympics, governor of Massachusetts, unsuccessful presidential candidate. But that's when I first really started to take notice of him, his leadership style, his business acumen. I think if you could get him, Randy, he'd be a great guest for the show because I think that the leadership nuggets he could share would be incredible. But, the other part is sort of the personal part. And, you never really know somebody, but I just get the sense from him that he's got strong ethics, strong family man. And in these very difficult days, I think that he is a rare breed of statesman that we desperately need today.
I love that answer. Ryan, thanks for being on the show. I think we've both been looking forward to this, and it did not disappoint. And I greatly appreciate you taking the time to share your story. The last question that I have for you is, do you have any final asks of our listeners today or final thoughts you'd like to share?
Yeah, I do. Randy, I got something for the listeners. I got something for you.
Oh, all right.
First for the listeners, please stay informed and stay involved. We can't afford to take the credit union system for granted. Everywhere that there has been a credit union system established on this planet, the folks that created it and the people that came after them have had to fight for it. So if those who are most invested in credit unions don't speak for credit unions, who will? We've got to. And then for you, Randy, keep doing this. I think you are just scratching the surface in terms of the leadership wisdom in the credit union system. And so I encourage you, frankly, get out of the C-suite and go a couple of layers deeper. And I'm looking forward to the nuggets that you uncover as you talk with more emerging leaders in the credit union space. And frankly, some of the great interviews that you do from the folks that are outside of the space. But I wanted to say this to you, and I hope you don't edit this out. You are doing a great service here. I'm a big fan. I listen just about every week, and I just can't encourage you enough because this is exciting stuff. So thank you for having me. This has been a blast.
Well, thank you for being on the show, and thank you for the kind words. I am having an absolute blast creating this thing. So it has been an amazing little over a year now. So, but we will link to everything we talked about in the show notes. What's the best way for people to reach you if they have questions? LinkedIn, the Twitter machine, email?
Yeah. LinkedIn. I'll connect with everybody in the credit union system on LinkedIn. I'm on Twitter, and my email is available on CUNA's website. So any way. I don't do voicemail.
I've actually changed my voicemail to say I don't check this often, so you should email me or text or something. So thanks again, Ryan. This has been a blast. I hope you have an amazing day.
Thanks, Randy.
Before we go, I would once again like to thank Ryan for taking the time out of his busy schedule, and also a big thank you to our sponsor, Co-op Financial Services. Make sure to click on their link in the show notes and see everything they have going on. Also, if you're looking for your next book recommendation, make sure to check out the CUInsight Experience podcast book list. You can find all the books that have been mentioned on the show from all the way back to episode 1. So happy reading, and I hope you have a great day.